Hello and welcome to the Thinking Fellows podcast. My name is Caleb Keith, and today I am joined by Adam Francisco and Scott Keith for a special episode of the Thinking Fellows in honor of Dr. John Warwick Montgomery, who, depending on when this release, passed away, died a couple of days ago, is now in glory. And so now we're doing some honor of him at 1517, some articles that are coming out from various fellows, and now some podcasts as well. Dr. Montgomery was a senior fellow at 1517 and was, a lot of the founding of 1517 was originally around the redistribution of his books.
Yeah, I mean, the reason that Ted and Steve started what was then 1517, the Legacy Project, was to publish and distribute Dr. Montgomery's library, essentially.
Right. So the first several years of my part-time work at 1517, in fact, the first 2 years before Thinking Fellows, had a lot of traveling with backpacks full of books to churches and selling a lot of history, law, Christianity, and jurisprudence. And
anytime anybody would have a gig where they're doing an apologetics shtick at a church, we'd bring a backpack full of Montgomery's books and try to sell them.
Right. So, so I think that really did categorize a lot of that early 1517 was getting these apologetic materials back in. So, what sort of theme, these are difficult episodes, the second difficult episode this year to do in remembering a senior fellow who has died. Where should we start? Maybe I'm certain that there are some new listeners and some listeners who don't exactly know who Dr. Montgomery was. So maybe there.
Yeah, I mean, this is it's kind of interesting. I don't think Adam did either. I didn't know personally Dr. Montgomery, say, as well as like Rod or Jim. And so this is a different kind of tribute. When we did the sort of tributes to Rod and Jim, there was a lot of, personal stuff involved there. With Montgomery, the influence, at least as far, I'll speak for myself, for me, was mostly intellectual. In fact, I'll just be honest, say on the personal level, he and I did not get along very well. And we just, now I'm not unique there. I had a tendency to not always agree with his conclusions, because he had conclusions about a lot of things. And that was always difficult. And so in the last sort of 10 years of his life, I got to know him a little bit better, because at points he would travel back and forth for 1517, travel back and forth with originally his wife, Lanny, from France, and they'd stay at the Legacy House. Your mom and I would be at the Legacy House. And so through all that, but at the end of the day, his meaningful impact on me is just, it's intellectual. It was his work. It was things like sensible Christianity, history, law, and Christianity, myth, allegory, and gospel, faith founded on fact, things like that, different lectures. I remember sitting at Concordia in the 20th century theology class that Dr. Rosenblatt taught, that he hated teaching. He said he hated teaching. He was very good at teaching it. But he said he hated teaching because he hated 20th century theology and theologians. But one of the highlights of that class is he would play the Montgomery Altizer God is Dead debate recording in that class and kind of react to it. I think these days we'd call it a reaction podcast or a reaction video. Yeah, where he plays a little bit, stops. Can you believe?
Wow, he would have gotten millions of views if
Yeah, and he would do this in class, and it was great. And that was the first time I ever heard Dr. Montgomery's voice. I had read some of the books, but the first time I ever heard his voice, which is, Adam Choice was distinctive.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but at the end of the day, he is, as far as I understand it, the modern sort of author of the evidential historical apologetic, which is the one that I know I still gravitate towards and lean on. Maybe take a different path to getting there. I always say do a little bit more prolegomena, but by the end of the day, when I'm doing apologetics, that's what I'm doing, is that apologetic from Dr. Montgomery. I'm not presuppositionalist. I'm not doing, typically not doing the arguments, for the existence of God from the classical arguments. I'm doing the historical apologetic. So he was, cast a big shadow for sure.
Yeah. I first met him, and maybe you were there, but this is the 90s. I had taken my first apologetics course. I was very new to theology and even newer to apologetics, but Dr. Rosenblatt, I don't know that we drove up with him, but he told us about this thing at University of California in Santa Barbara, which was like, a 3-hour drive from Irvine.
Yeah, it's more of a haul than people think to get to Santa Barbara.
Yeah. Especially if you're going around traffic hours, But we went up there to hear him do. I think it was like A Lawyer's Case for Christianity was the title, something like that. And it was a humongous room filled with, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of students and student groups and faculty. And I was mesmerized at how, because when he did these big public lectures or even small things, he was just crystal clear and logically incisive and fun or funny. He had a very distinct. He was eccentric, and it was just kind of fun. And I think I met him and talked to him for like 2 minutes there. But then when we were living in England, Corey Moss and I and our wives, we'd go to Cambridge, down to Cambridge. I got to emphasize down to Cambridge.
To the other place.
But we'd pass through, it was called Milton Keynes, which was just north of where he was living at the time. So we would stop on occasion and have a pub meal with him. And that's where I got to know him. It's not like we were buddies or anything like that, but got to know him more. And what was interesting is, like, there were the books, I read every one of his books that I could get my hand on, spending lots of money at Archives Bookshop in Pasadena.
That's right.
Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
And, well, not lots of money, but basically my Montgomery.
I mean, at the time, it felt like lots of money.
Yes.
Yeah.
But we got to know him there, and on a personal level, he was very different than his writings. He was funny. But very quirky, I think, is maybe a good way to describe it. And then when we moved to the U.S., this would have been 10 years later, I got this email from him. Maybe 2010. It was when Rachel was pregnant with Robert, and he asked if I'd come out to Strasbourg to teach for his academy that had been going on for 15 years, or around 15 years at that point. And I thought, whoa, that's incredible. Of course I'd do it. And so anyway, I got to know him even better when I was out there, but I had the flu when I was teaching. So I was kind of miserable, but, the thing with Dr. Montgomery is, I remember him telling Rosenblatt once that, people had told him that he was eccentric. And, I remember Rod saying, "No, not you." And that was, I think that's one of the best ways to describe him. I mean, I reread his autobiography recently, which is fun, but he was everywhere.
Yeah.
We
tend to not, I'll give it to me. I tend to not realize that by the time I met him, he was probably 70, which is 20-ish years older than I am right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's, or 65, 68, something like that. And by that time, he was, think of how active he's been in the last 30 years. And he was already like in the twilight in a lot of ways. He had the exciting things like climbing Mount Ararat and whatnot, looking for Noah's Ark had happened probably in his 30s, which was 30 to 40 years before I met him.
Yeah. And he met President Anwar Sadat of Egypt, a prime minister of Israel, the Hashemite king of Jordan. He's going to it's Turkey and Moldova and maybe other places when he hears that evangelists or missionaries have been arrested, and doing what he can to get them freed or so that they're not executed or whatever their fate might be. There's this one story in his autobiography. I think he wrote a paper on it too about how he defended a couple who had left Scientology, and they were doing all this sort of exposure to Scientology. So the Church of Scientology tried to sue them, and his tact was, well, in order to show whether or not they're guilty of defamation or slander or whatever, we need all the documents of Scientology. Yeah. And the Church of Scientology wouldn't hand them over because they don't want people to know. So those are the sort of things that you learn about him reading his stuff and talk with him. If you go somewhere that has a history with Dr. Montgomery, you'll hear other stories, other sides of stories and things like that. So he's like this international man of mystery, I guess.
Yeah.
And
it's like a theological CIA agent.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah.
And
maybe he was.
And he had at least 11 earned academic degrees. Not bizarre, but very unique.
Well, didn't he just get a degree like last year?
Well, a couple of years ago at, when was that? Was it in England, Leeds or something? I don't know.
I mean, he pursued degrees.
Yes.
Like most people don't.
Yeah.
Like Caleb pursues snowboards.
Yeah. He's certified to work on about a half a dozen different Macintosh or Apple operating systems.
From the 80s, probably.
And his apartment was like an archive, like a Apple archive.
Yeah.
The last time I was there, it was
the house in France is supposed to be even more so.
Oh wow, yeah. It was actually pretty incredible. Like the amount of, if you were having to go through the stuff, like the file nightmare though, because there's computers with certain files that he's referencing.
Worse than Rod
and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that kind of thing is funny, but cool.
Yeah. Then he loved cars, these
Citroens.
Cars.
Yeah.
And he had a DeLorean. I don't know. Did he retain it?
I don't know. I know there's still, I think 3 or 4 Citroens in France at the house in France.
Old ones,
yeah. The last time I saw him in France, not that long ago, I mean, he was probably 87 or something like that. And he was zipping around Strasbourg, like, faster than you should be in like a 1963 Citroen.
Yeah.
So,
yep. I remember walking through Strasbourg with him, and he's just talking with everybody he comes across with it in what I presume is perfect, fluent, like native proficiency in French, but very eccentric French, kind of like the French, and it's like, this guy is just incredible. The way I put it in this, it's posted now. It's been posted. A blog post on him was that he was a Renaissance man, but I didn't get a chuckle from you, Scott, on this, but I put maybe in parentheses, yet a thoroughly convinced Lutheran, meaning a Renaissance man, not that he loves all the Neoplatonism and all that weird stuff, but
it was 5:30 in the morning when I read it. So.
Oh yeah, that's right. And I think you were kind of poking fun at Caleb because he was still sleeping at 5:30 a.m. But talk about you.
I was sleeping at 5:30, guys. You hear that? What did I wake up at 30 minutes later? Whoa.
He was also, in terms of his role in the Lutheran Church, broadly speaking, and in theological circles more specifically, cannot be underestimated. And even outside, he's one of the key figures in defending a high view of the Scriptures as God's very word in the age of Seminex and the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. I don't know all the details, but I'm told that he's the one, or at least his ideas and essays are the ones that helped the Southern Baptist Convention maintain its high view of Scripture just a few years back in convention, and so he's everywhere.
He came to Lutheranism by conviction too. So,
yeah.
I mean, he was evangelized into the Christian faith in his college years, I believe, at Cornell. And, once in the faith, sort of did a very Dr. Montgomery thing.
Surveyed all the options
to see which ones made the most sense, were most consistent with the scriptures, and landed not just in Lutheranism, but in LCMS Lutheranism. And I mean, wow.
Yeah, but it took a little while.
It's a good story.
Like Rod, wasn't he? Was it ALC or LC? It must.
He was ALC. I think he was ALC.
And then colloquized in, I think.
Yeah, you're correct.
And so that, not just the Lutheran by conviction, but LCMS by conviction in the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just had dinner with...
And somehow stayed rostered his entire life, even while in France for the last 30 years.
I don't know how he managed that.
He could do anything.
Yeah.
He could make stuff happen.
He was a professor and I guess dean or chair probably of whatever at Trinity Evangelical TEDS Trinity Evangelical what?
Divinity School, isn't it?
A Divinity School in Deerfield,
yeah,
Illinois, Chicago area for over a decade, I believe. Then he started his own school, Simon Greenleaf School of Law, and was it in Costa Mesa, Santa Ana, something like that. That was kind of short-lived for some controversy there. And
now the sort of inheritor of that is Trinity, right?
Yeah. And I was just in Fort Wayne teaching this course, and there was a guy who joined the course, a pastor who got his M.A. from Simon Greenleaf School of Law, a guy named, Joseph Goodell, who has since gone. He's a pastor, but also a great evangelist and missionary. He credits his ability to do those things to Dr. Montgomery. So it's interesting the way when you're moving about in apologetic and theological circles, a lot of people know about Montgomery, and some people know him and have. It's very clear as you talk to them how influential Montgomery has been on them in terms of the apologetic and the bold confessional Lutheranism. I don't know. Can we just keep rearranging here? I
would say on that note, Rod used to get kind of angry with me when I would sort of give too much credit to Rod for sort of influencing all of us. He'd say, no, it's Montgomery. And I'd say, no, it's you. And he'd get mad at me and say, if it weren't for Dr. Montgomery, there would be no Rod Rosenblatt as you know him.
Yeah, that is, Rod would make that point over and over.
Well, it's a good reminder of that the faith is, handed down, right? And Montgomery, he lived so long and was so influential to various people that he was a good, even living example of how the faith of your ancestors is passed on through people, right? Because even Rod could tell you who.
Sure.
In a sense.
Rod didn't he do his master's degree in philosophy of religion or something under Montgomery at Trinity?
So
that kind of is apologetic.
Isn't the story, that he gave up a full ride PhD somewhere noteworthy?
Well, I think it was the seminary in St. Louis, Concordia Seminary.
Oh, was it?
Louis.
I thought it was more than
now I'm going to go up to Trinity and study with Montgomery, and then he went out to Strasbourg, or maybe he went to USC for a little while, but ultimately ended at Strasbourg.
Yeah.
Or his PhD or his THT, I don't know.
PhD.
And it's a PhD.
PhD. Okay. In fact, Rod would make the point that it wasn't a THT. He made the point once while hanging out with Jim Nestigan, which was kind of funny because Jim Nestigan had the THT. Oh, first, so that was kind of an awkward moment.
Are you aware? I'm sure you're aware of. Remember when Rod would always talk about Montgomery's interest in the occult, not his personal interest in the occult, but in studying the occult?
Yeah, I learned. The book?
Principalities and Powers.
No, he's got one on alchemy. I have it.
Oh, does he?
Yeah. It's right there in the corner. It's a big green one in the corner.
The big green one?
The big green one all the way in the corner. It's on
this stuff. And Rod...
that's the jurisprudence one.
Rod mentioned once in class how when the movie The Exorcist was coming out, Montgomery wrote some tract or something to hand out to people as they're coming out about these sorts of things. And And then he was telling me how he had this interest in, just like an academic interest in the occult and principalities and powers of darkness and stuff. And when we went to his house in England, he showed us his library. And if I remember correctly, he had to buy an additional house just for his books.
Yeah, the same similar story in Strasbourg now, because the books are in Strasbourg. They're in Suffelheim, but Strasbourg-ish.
Yeah. But then I remember him pointing out to me, and he made the point, and it's since been sort of verified, if you will, that he had the largest occult library in the Western world. And
gosh, I couldn't sleep in that house.
Yeah, no kidding, because I'm pretty freaked out by that stuff. But
me too.
But he made the point, I don't know if he made it said it or wrote it, but that if your worldview is one that is open to something like miracles, which it should be, you should have an open worldview, not a closed sort of worldview.
You have to consider the demonic powers as well.
You have to consider that as well, and so he explored that. He was of course, a consummate. What would we call it, a foodie today?
Yes,
but is that what gastronomy essentially is?
Yes. Yeah,
a big cookbook thing. I read his Gastronomicon Botamicum, I think is the title. Which is hilarious. It's kind of a cookbook, but more of a wine pairing book with foods and with lots of autobiographical and apologetic notes. And that thing is like classic Montgomery. If you want to know the extent, that's the book.
When he was publishing that, he would state openly how upset he was that Capon got to the subject matter first with the Supper of the Lamb and the Great High Feast, which is essentially a very similar kind of like theology and foodie interaction book. Yeah. And so it was, he had been wanting to do this. Capon did it like 15 years earlier or something like that and pulled it off. And then Montgomery did it and would reference how, I think he'd reference how he appreciated it, but I've heard him say how upset he was that it got to it first. The book I'm thinking of is Cross Constellation and Crucible.
Oh, on Johann Valentine Andrei.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's significant. That was a dissertation,
and the end of it is Lutheran theology and alchemy in the age of Reformation.
Yeah, because what he's arguing in that book is against the thesis that this I don't know if it was a nephew of Jacob Andrea, one of the guys who wrote the Formula of Concord, was the founder of Rosicrucianism.
Oh, interesting.
And Montgomery disproves that. And in his autobiography, he talks about how he loved being invited to like Rosicrucian societies to show them that this Lutheran theologian is not their founder, it's something else.
That's the other thing that's important to say about him is he would go anywhere.
Oh, yeah.
And he would talk to anybody. I mean, as opposed to our modern age where you're not supposed to give those people an audience or credibility by showing up and speaking out their thing, he would do the exact opposite of that. He would go talk to anybody, debate to anybody, argue with anybody, give the gospel to anybody.
Yes, yeah. I think Rod, would always emphasize if somebody gives you an opportunity to speak the gospel, even if they're Unitarians or whatever, do it, right?
Yeah.
And I wonder if he got that from Montgomery.
He did, and I think we've taken that on at 1517 and get a little bit of flack for it. But at the end of the day, of all the things I respect Montgomery for, that's even in personal life, that's pretty high up there for me. That he was willing to go into the battlefield.
Well, I think that as part of also what made him contentious is that his ability to do that, or Adam, like you said, like have these tracks as well that he'd be willing to take to people going into a movie theater or something. Is he just really didn't care what people thought about him. So, hence why there's a lot of people with contentious relationships, because he'd just say whatever he wanted. And if you hated him afterwards, he'd just be on his way.
I think Adam pointed out to me that he wrote in his autobiography that he hopes many of those people would forgive him.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's a second to last paragraph. There's those, I think I sent you some screenshots of things I'm reading on that I didn't catch when I first read it. But, yeah. And, one of his, I don't think this was his last debate. I can't remember whether it was the Kloa debate or the Shabir Ali debate, but I believe it's on YouTube. You can see his debate in London with this Muslim cleric named Shabir Ali, who is one of the more high-profile debaters, much younger than Montgomery. And Montgomery was, being a lawyer, was able to get people to concede or say things that are just monumentally stupid, like the famous debate up in Canada where he gets that philosopher to just throw out all of...
That's the Altizer debate, isn't it? Yeah.
Is it? Oh, I thought it was it's the one that History, Law, and Christianity is based off of. It was the professor of classics stands up and says, don't do
not that. Yeah.
Yeah. But in the Shabir Ali debate, in the Islamic view of things, Jesus was not put on a cross, nor did he die. And so Montgomery gets Shabir Ali in by saying, we've got to go with the evidence and figure out what happened to Jesus. And so he gets Shabir Ali to say something like, that he's not exactly sure what the blood or the red stuff was on Jesus when the spear is thrust in his side. But Shabir Ali says it could have been ketchup. So Montgomery was really good at getting people to say monumentally stupid stuff because their worldview or their position was monumentally stupid to begin with. Not that I'm saying anything about Islam here, but
wink, wink.
You need to edit that out. I don't know, but so he was. In his debates, the one with Madalyn Murray O'Hair, I think it's available on audio. I think Rod played it for me once, is remarkable. And I mean, he didn't care. He skewered her, and rightfully so. She was a cretin or a creep.
I mean, he was a skilled debater.
Oh, yeah. Would not want to mess with him. I remember you saying
top of the game,
Scott, like, I have a principle. I don't argue with lawyers when you're...
Yeah, well, I didn't always follow that principle with him. But the funny thing is he I'm not saying he wasn't right in his debates, but he was one of those debaters. I had a friend like this in college who I did debate with at one point, that sometimes they can just win. I'll say it that way.
Mm-hmm.
They can just win because they're better at it. They're better at the process.
It's a skill as much as it is about actually being the one who's correct in a lot of cases.
Now, I would say every debate I heard Montgomery do like this, for the most part, I'd say he was on the side of the angels with his. And so that's not what I'm saying. But at the end of the day, I think he could have been on the wrong side and still won some of those. So good at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the important, lasting thing through 1517 now and continuing to publish his works and a lot of the influence on, because he had a lot of students who are outside of Lutheranism, who are apologists and many other sort of traditions or whatever. But I think one of the reasons Lutheranism holds on to him is that his approach to doing apologetics is uniquely compatible with Lutheran doctrine because it is, unshakingly Christocentric
and inductive.
He would always go back to the cross. The first place you're doing apologetics is cross. A place where this matters was a cross, and that was my. You can get that experience from reading his books, but also just having gone to the academy twice with him. It was just really evident when. You could see him get frustrated when people wanted to spend too much time on an apologetic issue that wasn't the cross of Christ, or could tell that they were getting in a spiral where they weren't going to make it there. And you could see that he'd kind of see, like, if there's no path to getting to Christ in your apologetic, you're spinning your wheels. And so that was the thing I think that makes it what Montgomery did uniquely Lutheran, is that it really focused on that, and it then had a mechanism for getting to preaching justification always, and not just arguing. And so Montgomery also...
Or not just worldview destruction.
Yeah. Montgomery had a very strong emphasis on preaching. The gospel is the other big thing. I had seen him say that. I had seen him erupt about, arguing people into the faith and yell something and, that goofy voice he would do. Heavens no, stuff like that. You have to preach the gospel. It's the Holy Spirit and stuff like that. So he had extreme emphasis on that if you actually got a hold of him too, and a frustration with, and a sincere frustration with people who weren't getting around to preaching Christ.
Yeah. He would get really frustrated with one of his students from long ago who is still an outstanding apologist, but he spends so much time on like theistic arguments, that it doesn't get around to a historical apologetic for Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. He has it's in I think the last place it was published is his book, Christ as Center and Circumference. There's an essay in there entitled something like The Apologetic Thrust of Lutheran Theology. And in my mind, that's sort of the classic essay on evidential apologetics in light of Lutheran theology being not just compatible with, but essential to each other. So what else? There's a lot more we could say.
There's a lot more you can say. I mean, we were past first met him. I first met him in 1997 when I attended the academy, which was either the first or the second time he did it. It was a real process for me getting there because I was poor as poor, and it kind of, I always laugh because I enjoyed it. The story as it come out over the year, I kind of broke the system. He wanted people even back then to come for 2 years, but he published the entire sort of reading list for the 2 years that was required to be able to pass his tests and everything. Thinking it would take people 2 years to read it all. And I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but when motivated, I can consume materials. And so prior to going to the thing, I read everything on the list, on the assigned reading list, and sat for both exams at the end of the year and passed both exams. And it was, the next year you had to come 2 years no matter what. Let's just see. And it was such an experience for me because it was my first time ever leaving the country. And I didn't know what I was doing. This is before cell phones. This is before, for me, it was before everything. Hadn't even graduated as an undergrad yet. Didn't graduate till 98. And so what an experience, though. What an experience to travel internationally, study under John Montgomery. I think Mike Horton was there the year I was there. And to just spend time with Mike, too, was amazing. And, I mean, we just did a show with Mike some 30 years later. I mean, isn't that weird?
Yeah.
Just incredible. Just such an experience. I'd say I haven't been back lately, but back then that Apologetics Academy was for students. I mean, it was very much for students. There were about 20 of us in the academy, 20, maybe a little more, and we were all students, either undergrad or master's students.
It was definitely an older demographic when I went. I would say I was one of maybe two people student age and I went with friends a couple times. So maybe there were 2 or 3 of us out of the 20-something students, student age when I got there. Though I don't think that was his fault. I think that's kind of the failure of Lutheranism to really push continuing ed on people who graduate colleges and churches funding pastors' travel and stuff like that. But
yeah, it was incredible. I mean, it was such an opportunity for an experience like that for a young student. Inspiring. It's inspired me to want to know more because of that.
Yeah. This is a little different topic, but when we invited, so Corey Moss and I had started this Lutheran Society in Oxford, and we had a little bit of money to bring out speakers, and we asked Dr. Montgomery if he'd want to do a presentation at Oxford, and so he came out. I believe we were able to acquire a room at Trinity College. It's either Trinity, Balliol, or Oriel College, and he came out and gave us a lawyer's case for Christianity or something like that. And it was another room full of, all sorts of students. And I remember watching him afterwards. Like, he concluded by with a story about Thomas Paine, the author of Common Sense and Age of Reason, and how there are reports that Thomas Paine, when he was on his deathbed, people would send like pastors and things to him. And when a evangelical pastor came to him, he told the people attending to him never to allow a pastor to come again because he's greatly troubled. Because Thomas Paine was not a Christian, right? He's greatly troubled by what he hears from them concerning the gospel, and because he wrote so many things against it, right? And Montgomery said to the audience, he says, "And if you're troubled by what you've heard tonight, I'm happy to stick around until all hours and answer any other questions you might have." And I watched him for it was probably an hour and a half. We missed our reservations at the Randolph, and thankfully Rachel worked there, so we were able to squeeze in later. But every student who had questions or concerns, he would take time out, and over dinner, he said something like, when it comes to systematic or doctrinal or confessional theology, I do not compromise. He described himself as a bulldog or something like that. But when it comes to apologetics and opportunities to evangelism, I'm more than willing to take my time and be gentle. Because I saw a side to him that kind of blew my mind. He was extremely
slow and gentle,
with non-Christians. And I think that was always interesting to me, because he would end up a lot of his apologetics sort of presentations with, by no means an altar call or anything like that, but basically an opportunity to come up and talk with him so Montgomery could lead them to a point of decision, if you will. Though, I mean, he would use terms like that sometimes too, but of course he'd clear it up very quickly theologically, that it wasn't their decision ultimately. But that was kind of telling to me, because here you got this old confessional Lutheran theologian, but when he's in what Luther calls in his Galatians commentary at the very beginning, this other arena, he operated differently, not in a contradiction to his theology, but in a way that was more than willing to lead people to Christ in a evangelical way. So,
does he say in Sensible Christianity, paraphrasing here probably, but that the purpose of apologetics is to remove the obstacles on the road of the cross of Christ so that the non-believer can face the offense of the cross?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know, sir. He in many ways, it's almost like, when St. Paul, that is, not Paul Smith down the road, but St. Paul is before King Agrippa in Acts 26, and he's stopped after he's giving his apologia, as Luke called it. And it's Festus who says, "Paul, your great learning has driven you mad. You're manic, Do you think in so short a time you could persuade the king to become a Christian?" And Paul responds, "Not only do I wish I could persuade him, but everybody here, because as y'all know, I don't know if he had a southern accent, but as you all know, these things I speak of, namely the crucifixion and resurrection, did not happen in a corner." That's sort of captured. That's Montgomery's apologetic spirit, I think. I've heard it once described, and since then I think it's very helpful as a not just this negative apologetic. You referred to like worldview deconstruction or something earlier. There's a lot of apologists who do that and can do that very well. Montgomery was more about arguing towards something, demonstrating something to be true
toward the cross.
And that's his.
And the tomb.
He's not unique in that, but I think he was unique in the second half of the 20th century, and especially in his debates against like presuppositionalism, for example. That's the real point of apologetics. It's not showing how brilliant and coherent your totalizing system is, but rather in removing obstacles and giving a reason for the hope that's in you.
Well, yeah, because an internally coherent system can still be wrong. But at the end of the day, Montgomery would argue towards the fact that if the grave, if the bones of Jesus are still in the grave, then Christianity is wrong. And so what we're doing is arguing that the tomb was empty on the third day.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, he'll be missed. He'll very, very much be missed. He, so much of what he did was foundational to what I believe, and here's what Adam believes, to be true and helpful, and so much of it was foundational to the forming of 1517. So we thank God that he sent him.
Yeah, and look forward to seeing him again.
That's right.
All right, guys. Well, very good. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Thinking Fellows podcast. If you'd like to find more about Dr. Montgomery, I'll link the blogs that are getting published in his memory at 1517.org. His contributor listing at 1517 is now listed as a fellow in glory, but if you click that, all of his resources that are published at 1517 can be found sorted there. He has podcast audio that we've published throughout the years on there under Christianity on Trial, which is sort of rebooting and remastering radio shows that he used to do. All of his books are at shop.1517.org. Various articles and things like that we've recorded and published at 1517 are available in convenient places there that you can check out on the show notes. We thank you for listening to this episode. We will catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.